Hello and welcome to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director here at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today. It's also a pleasure to be joined by three guests here in our studio today who are, over the next half hour or so, I'm sure going to broaden our understanding of libraries and their role in our communities today. We're very pleased to be joined today by J. Violet Gannon, who is the Executive Director of the Manchester Community Library, Phyllis Skidmore, who is the Executive Director of the Canfield Library in Arlington, and also Jason Broughton, who is the State Librarian, who's come to us all the way from Barre, Vermont. We really appreciate you taking the time, all of you, to be with us today. I know you all have busy schedules and really appreciative of you making the time. So Jason, since you had the dubious pleasure of having the longest drive to make today, to be with us today, I thought we'd reward you for that by throwing the first question your way to help us get our conversation started. And that is just to tell us a little bit about the State Library. What does it do? What is its role? Is it a quote-unquote regular library like you'd go to borrow a book or an audio tape or a movie for a couple of weeks? What goes on up there?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for having me here. The Department of Libraries for the state of Vermont is what would be considered a special library. We are a department within state government, and we reside under the Agency of Administration. Secretary is Suzanne Young. And within that, we would be one that you would come to ask some specific questions about as a Vermonter, but our main constituency would be those of the state government or state employee. We also have a forward-facing side that will help a lot of libraries in a variety of different ways through youth services, board and governance, small and rural populations, and continuing education. We do a lot of statewide items with fiscal dollars specifically, and of course some state dollars as well to make things, I would say, across the state much more equitable, if at all possible, and a lot more access. So our goal is statewide services for Vermonters. We are unique. You would call us special. And no, you really wouldn't come and check out a book from us, but your librarian or library staff person might do so, as we are a library for them as well. But you wouldn't have the average Vermonter come to us to kind of check out anything specifically, unless they're interested in government documents, which we have a lot of. Mm-hmm.
Well, I remember the last time I was up there, was a few years ago. I went up there to do some research for, back when I was the editor of a local newspaper, you had digital copies of
the newspaper,
the editions of the paper from the 19th century, which was really invaluable, and about the only place I could go to find them all too, by the way, so I'm glad you still have them.
Yes.
Anyway, I wanted to throw a question out to all three of you, to give you each a chance to talk a little bit about how you see libraries changing and evolving in the 21st century. I mean, for so many years, I'm sure people thought of libraries, as I said earlier, as a place to go where you'd borrow a book or maybe a movie or a cassette of some sort or another. Boy, I'm dating myself there, aren't I? But it seems like all libraries are sort of evolving into a broader role in their communities. And Violet, why don't we let you start with that? Manchester Community Library hosts a lot of events. Is that the direction that you see the library going down the road?
I do, but at the same time, I think libraries really cater to their communities. And so you'll have a different configuration depending upon where you land, be it a rural library or an urban library. And even within urban libraries, there's a lot of heterogeneity. But at the Manchester Community Library, we pride ourselves on being a hub of community life. And at any given time, you can find the youngest of young and the oldest of old. And for me, that's what our goal is to really have that intergenerational co-creation around, be it Mahjong or Meals on Wheels or Rolling Stones and Beatles, community outreach that we have for folks who are interested in the 60s, let's say. So I think it really varies, and that's the beauty, to my mind, of libraries, is that there isn't an archetype of it. And moreover, it will continue to evolve as our constituents evolve, and our best work is really fed to us by community members.
Yep, and volunteers that we have a great impact also on the library and what they bring to us, because the library, Martha Canfield Library, has a great group of volunteers that run the book sale. They help at the desk. They help in our historical collection, which is fairly extensive, and they bring a lot of suggestions, ideas, and energy to the library.
How do you all see technology changing the libraries? I mean, there's been a lot of written about that, and of course, we're well into the so-called digital era now at this point. But beyond the obvious applications that computers bring, I mean, is technology being interwoven into how people sort of use library services even more?
I would say from our vantage point of looking at it from a statewide perspective, yes. You have a variety of methods that are, I would say, kind of at the intersection of technology and what the purpose of a library can be. From an informational standpoint, you are having libraries where you have bring your own device because we offer Wi-Fi in a variety of our buildings. But within that doesn't mean everybody knows how to appropriately utilize that information or even to access their own device. We have lots of people who give their parents, even grandparents, in some cases great-grandparents, a device, and that poor person comes to the library and said, I got this, can you help me? And so the librarian and library staff is tasked with trying to kind of help integrate contemporary items right now with what we're utilizing to a populace that might not have been so connected. But that is more of the front-facing side with what we do with the public. I would say on the back end, libraries are starting to begin to access different types of platforms. How information is utilized and curated is becoming a big topic. So on the front level and on the back level, libraries are having to make some interesting adjustments to what they'd like to do when it comes to community, but also how they can incorporate that and keep everybody from not having a digital divide is what I see from a state level.
Yeah. And also to offer access to the new platforms for reading, because we offer digital ebooks, audiobooks, and people can download that from our website, which is another great resource. And for travel, a lot of people borrow books to listen to while they travel. Yeah, and we also are fairly good at helping people to navigate the e-government.
Yes. Oh, goodness.
That's important.
Yep.
People like me need that.
Job applications, online job applications. I've had a few people come in and say, I don't know that much about computers. I have to do this online application. It's the only way I can apply for this job.
I was wondering also, we've heard an awful lot in the last few years about the changing demographics of Vermont. We're an aging state. I think we're still number 2 behind Maine in terms of being the oldest average population. But I was just wondering if that has any implications for what you all do. I mean, would that mean you'd want books with larger print or some kind of special keyboards or anything like that, or maybe something completely beyond all of that? Is that a factor in any of your thinking, kind of long range, going forward?
I would say so, absolutely. It comes into play with our beloved technology services librarian. You can schedule a half-hour meeting with her and go from everything of like, this is an iPad, I have no idea, it was a gift for the holidays, what do I do with it? And within those devices, there is a fair amount of technological flexibility. It's just folks don't know about that. So the size of the font is something simple that you can change, that can dramatically change someone's ability to access information and knowledge. So it doesn't have to necessarily be that you have a keyboard with larger keys so that someone with fine motor coordination challenges can access it, but it can be using the technology that we have at our fingertips, literally, to sort of accommodate folks and what their needs are.
At the same time, I imagine there's also a great interest that you all have in attracting kids, younger generation, young adults, younger readers into the mix as well. I would.
Yes, a big part of what we do at the library is to maintain children's reading levels in the summer by encouraging them to come to the library, participate in our programs and activities, and we have a reading club that the kids can sign up for. So that's one of our things, is to help the children maintain their reading levels over the summer.
But on a statewide level, what we are trying to do, when you mentioned large print, but also kind of pivoting also to the youth services side, is we are working on two ends of a spectrum. So our Able Library was just recently reintroduced and renamed from the former, which was the Library for the Blind and Physically Handicapped. One of our goals is to stop talking, I would say, about the service population and talk more about the services to that population. Mm-hmm. So ABLE would stand for audio, braille, large print, and ebooks or electronic resources. And what that allows you to do is we do have a hand in helping people who are in vulnerable populations or they physically can't hold a book to be able to access information through the use of the service that we provide. It comes from the National Library Service under the Library of Congress, and what it allows people to do is connect to audio, braille, a whole host of items. One of our big pushes as Vermont ages is to make sure Vermonters know that the service is available for them, because you may need it or may know of someone who does, but also connect to the youth side. So we're actually trying to connect more with the Agency of Education. We have hosted a variety of things on a statewide level to kind of introduce that to unified school districts to let them know that your students can also have specific enrollment or eligibility into the program as well. So you could have, for example, services personally at your own house, but also have the same services at school through the Able Library.
Interesting. As I was wondering, you almost work fairly closely with school libraries too in the area, I would imagine, or at least have discussions back and forth with your counterparts.
Yes, we do. We meet with the school librarians to balance our collections so that they focus more on the curriculum. We focus more on the leisure reading and a little bit of curriculum supplement. We also work with homeschool parents to develop some things that they may not be able to afford to have that the school has. So that's another thing that we do.
I was wondering also, there's a sense that part of the mission of today's libraries ought to be to help serve those who are so-called underserved or historically have been underserved by libraries, maybe by self-choice, but folks who may not have thought of a library as their first option to go to when they might need some help, let's say with a job application, as you mentioned a moment ago, or to acquire some information about something they need. Do you think at this point it's sort of important that libraries kind of do some reaching out to those segments of the population that maybe historically, it wasn't like, oh, I want to go to the library today to borrow a book?
I think partnerships are the bread and butter of what we do, and just sort of in the next few months alone, I can name, United Counseling Services is going to partner with us for Mental Health Month, which is May. We're going to have a local Vermont author talk about mental illness and mental health issues, and that's a way to bring that population in the door. We are running a career workshop for folks later this month that's also geared towards resume building, interviewing, and networking. And during that time frame, we're also going to be offering child workshops with our youth services librarians so that childcare isn't an issue, which is often the case in terms of accessing those kinds of services. So I think you sort of need to think very creatively and out of the box in ways that that are the path of least resistance, and that's the partnership approach.
I guess on a statewide level, what we have been trying to utilize ourselves is to focus in on some of the specific areas that have not been probably examined, or there is a transition because there is something more immediate. For example, the opioid crisis that is within the state. We are able to sit on the prevention committee of the Governor's Opioid Coordinating Council, and what we have examined and ascertained from that is libraries can play a very important role in helping people in unique ways. Now, some people might find that quite interesting. It's like, what? But a library is going to help with the opioid crisis? How can it do that? But it can do that through social therapy or social healing. Lots of people who come from trauma or abuse items, in a sense, can escape to a library to find literature for leisure reading, love, labor, enjoyment, just to kind of get away. But it also is a third space. In some cases, some libraries are having So unique opportunities, as I would call it, with AA meetings, to having recovery meetings at their libraries for some of the community as well. So we see ourselves helping in unique ways when the population has immediate things for impacts that occur, or things that are a little bit more long haul. In other words, early learning, when you're dealing with educating children. What does that exactly embody when you want to do it from a community engaged perspective? So it's looking at some very unique topics and looking at underserved populations, but also, in a sense, trying to connect people with where they're at versus saying, like, we have the information as a library, come to us. We kind of are listening to our communities and saying, okay, how can we best suit you? Because what we have is information, and that information is, yes, I'll be the first to tell you, I love information. I'm not going to say I so much love books. I love what's in the book. And some people think because you're a librarian, you must love a book. I love what's in the book because I want to give that to you so you can, in a sense, be self-empowered to do different things.
What do you all see as the biggest challenges facing libraries around the state? Is it just financial? I mean, everything seems to come down to dollars eventually, and the budgets and all of that. But I just wondered if that's the sole major challenge you see, or if there are other ones that are, you say, gee, I hope we can get past this.
Ooh, I guess that comes back in my hand from another layout of looking at it from the state perspective. There are some very unique challenges across Vermont when it comes to some of our libraries. There are preservation items and needs. There are renovation item and needs, capital campaigns in some cases. There are funding allocations between some municipalities that need to be addressed or examined, but those, again, are locally controlled and locally sourced topics specifically. But those are challenges for some very unique calibers of libraries. Lots of people across the state have let us know that they love their library and that they wish the state could do more in a variety of ways. We are but one state entity. So what we are now trying to do is to connect with all of our partners in different state departments and also agencies and see what we can do to assist in some unique items specifically when it comes to what does it look like to preserve your building. We also, for example, are helping town select boards and also the public library trustee boards kind of hopefully talk in a more parallel or unified way. So we have teamed up with the Secretary of State's office to do a presentation called We're All in It Together, select boards and public library trustees, how we can kind of get along, because there are roles that the library board plays, in some cases based on the type of library you are, that you do have some interesting powers that you can execute. And that might not be of a surprise to the select board, but when it comes into action, there and sometimes can be some charged conversations of, well, I thought we had the power to do this. So our goal is to make sure that people know from even a board governance level that there are challenges for libraries, and the best thing that you can do is to have a partnership that understands the complexities of how that works out. So our role is to help foster those conversations and allow the library to be what the community would like it to be.
Yeah, and on the local level, I think probably a couple of the challenges are access to technology, Wi-Fi, broadband, especially for people who are working from home. And the other issue is getting to the library if you need to come in to do something at the library, and doing outreach to the really rural communities. And we partner with the churches to reach people. We partner with the school lunch program, and those sorts of things.
One last sort of financial related question. I understand that over the last couple of years there's been proposals floated to defund or cut the financing of the Institute for Museum and Library Services, which affects you folks here, some on the order of $290 million in the federal budget. Congress has resisted that invitation to do that the last couple of years, but I guess that's back on the table again, year 3. I guess I just wondered, since I had never heard of the Institute of Museum and Library Services, how would a funding cutback on that scale affect you all? I mean, would it be devastating, or would it be marginal?
For the department, because that would impact us in a very large scale way. The federal funding that we receive from IMLS, as we like to call it for short, is a little bit about a third of our budget. So within that, it would definitely degrade a lot of the things that we're trying to do statewide. For example, if you've ever borrowed a book through interlibrary loan, that is covered by some of our federal dollars. We have a courier service for information and resource sharing, so some of that is covered through that. Some of our consultants who are paid either for youth services, board governance, continuing education, special populations, would also be impacted by that, and even parts to the ABLE library that has its own populace for those who are vulnerable when it comes to library services, that would be impacted as well because it sits in a unique caliber as well, but under the Library of Congress. But again, federal money in a unique way being cut would have a severe and detrimental impact, I think, on Vermonters' lives for library services and what we can also offer to our libraries in the way of what we can do. It would diminish quite a lot.
Well, fortunately, I guess hopefully won't see that happen.
We hope.
And the last 2 years, that bullet has been dodged, but certainly it's something to be followed. Well, we have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to kind of touch on one other point here that kind of surfaced kind of recently. Over the weekend, we got word that the Dorothy Canfield Fisher Award was going to be renamed. Many folks will recall that about 18 months or so ago, the sort of the question first came up as to whether or not this Children's Book Award should be named after Dorothy Canfield Fisher, who's from Arlington, lived there for many years. Concerns were raised that she had a role in a eugenics movement that occurred in Vermont back in the 1920s and 30s. Some folks thought that maybe that was a bit of an overreaction, but anyway, on Friday last week, the State Library voted to change the name, or will be changing the name. You're going to go through a process of how that will be changed. But I guess I just wanted, since as it worked out timing-wise, we had you down here. This was an opportunity to explain a little bit of that thinking that went into that, and talk about it, since it really does have a very local resonance here.
This definitely has where state has some roots into the local culture on a specific topic. When we were looking at this entire thing from start to finish, under my predecessor, Scott Murphy, who was the former state librarian, he, in a sense, was gathering lots of information, having lots of conversations on the topic, looking at what this embodiment would look like. Unfortunately, he had to resign for personal reasons, and so within that, through a process, I am now your state librarian for the state of Vermont. Within that, in looking at all the recommendations, what the department would like to do is to seek a conversation on what Vermont would like to do when it comes to discussing the legacy of Dorothy Canfield Fisher. In looking at the award, the Board of Libraries, which is an advisory board to the Office of the State Librarian, made the recommendation that it be changed for some specific reasons. In the sense of, let's look at relevancy. There were some communications about some people not liking the abbreviated name. DCF could also stand for Department of Children and Families. And some people even said, is it really relevant? I don't think they were saying, like, is Dorothy Canfield Fisher not relevant, but is this award kind of the way things are with technology and accessing books? Do people still have enjoyment doing this? What we found out was that people resoundingly still enjoy this actual activity and love this type of award. And looking at it, however, there were some people in a variety of different, let's say, pathways, giving us feelings that, do we want to be more unified on this? How can we, in a sense, address this? And not in a sense, what some people like to say, whitewash history or look at revisionist. We do not seek to do that at all. In looking at the award, one of our first things we want to do is to have a unified embodiment. So we feel one opportunity is, if we were to rename, we would like to let the kids vote on that with some guidelines. We do not want to act like the British Navy, who ended up with Boaty McBoatface, because they allowed the whole public discourse to even include the internet. So if you let the internet name things, sometimes you get some interesting choices. Within that, though, we seek to have kids give us their opinion of what this would look like with some guidelines. The other aspect of this is we have an underlying goal, which is libraries are about discourse. And I think what we would like to have as part of the future of this conference going forward is to have the legacy of Ms. Fisher incorporated into that. So we seek to have conversations with the friends of Dorothy Canfield Fisher, the community, the town of Arlington, all of this we want to look at to say, what does this look like from a Vermont perspective? I am not a native Vermonter, as you can kind of tell. I was told, however, I can get that term 80 years after my death. So, but I must die in Vermont. But within that, Vermont does do things a little bit different. And so we seek to have full discourse on the life and times. And yes, we do become reflective to say, we do look back and say, well, what does this really mean? Is this what we really want to do? I think by having a full, open conversation on this, we can find a way to navigate this forward together, unified, and also have the legacy of Dorothy Canfield Fisher, a multifaceted woman, talked about in a way that represents what Vermont would like to have as part of a future conference. So we don't see it as where she's going away. We are now, I would say, openly, actively going to say we support these book awards, and within that, we're very proud to do so, and we hope that Vermont will also appreciate us for making sure that it is sustainable going forward in the future.
Phyllis, did you want to have, you must have some thoughts about this. I'm sure this was, you probably heard an earful or more from local residents about this whole situation, particularly when it first came up over a year or so ago.
Yeah, because Dorothy Canfield Fisher was an Arlington resident, there is a lot of feeling in Arlington that I've heard anyway, that, that people would like to keep the Dorothy Canfield Fisher as the name. But I think it's a great opportunity for discussion and also for discussing the whole issue of eugenics and educating the public about you know, what it was and what effect it had on the population. So you know, open discussion I think is great. That's what we're about.
Perfect.
Indeed, and that's what we're all here for.
Right.
Well, I want to thank you all for being with us today. Really interesting discussion, fascinating to hear about all of this. The libraries are such an important part of all of our communities, and exciting to see all the new changes and things that are coming into play here. And I want to thank all of you for being with us as well today. Hope you've enjoyed the discussion and found it interesting as I did for sure. And we'll see you all again the next time. Meanwhile, have a great day. Thank you very much.